All right, hello everybody. My name is Andrew Rothermel. Today I'm going to be presenting to you a proposal for research and evaluation, and it's going to be on the effects of resistance training on sprint start impulse and 100-meter sprint time. All right, so just a quick background on the 100-meter sprint. It's a linear movement. It's actually the only track running race that's 100% linear. Once we start getting up to over 200, or over 100, I'm sorry, into 200 and 400, it's going to start to involve an angular aspect to it. So this is a unique race where we're only performing a linear movement. Elite athletes are going to run this race in less than 10 seconds. So it's a very anaerobic movement, and there's not a lot of time to get from point A to point B. The races are going to be won and lost in less than a tenth of a second. Oftentimes it's going to be a hundredths of a second. So win and loss is, splitting hairs. You got to be able to perform and maximize the output. 40 to 45 strides to complete the race, so not a lot of strides either. Got to maximize each stride to the best you can. And also the last thing here, the current male 100-meter record, world record for the 100-meter sprint was set by Usain Bolt, 9.58 seconds. That was in 2009 in Berlin. So, okay, just a couple definitions here real quick, so we're all on the same page as we go along. So force, any influence that tends to change the motion of an object. So with sprinting, we got to apply a force off the blocks. We'll talk about that as we go to help us, get started in the race. Velocity is going to be a change in speed over time. Acceleration, how quickly you can change your velocity. So that's going to be a change in velocity. Kinetics, forces that generate motion, so we'll talk a lot about kinetics, and kinematics is going to be a description of motion. Center of mass, okay, center of mass is going to be the point on the body, okay, a singular point on the body where the mass is evenly distributed. And last definition here is impulse, and impulse can be defined as the area under the force time curve, and we're going to talk a lot about impulse, so you'll get a better definition and a better idea of what impulse is as we go along. So what is an efficient 100-meter sprint start? Lucky for us, I don't have to define it, someone else already did. So Tellitz and Doolittle describe this as an efficient acceleration of the first portion of a race is influenced by the way the sprinter is positioned in the blocks at the set command and the mechanics of how they leave the blocks at the sound of the gun. Okay, that sentence or that statement right there is going to be almost the complete basis for this proposal. So the question now is, how can we accomplish this? How can we accomplish an efficient sprint start? So first thing we can do, we can take a look at a few biomechanical positions. So there's 3 starting block parameters, and that's going to dictate the horizontal distance between the starting blocks. So we have 3 different parameters that have been studied extensively. It's going to be the bunched, the medium, and the elongated starts. Actually, I have a picture at the bottom corner of the PowerPoint here, and the horizontal distance is going to be the distance between these 2 blocks. So if we go long ways here, okay, the distance between the front and the back block, that's going to be the horizontal distance. So a bunched, a medium, and an elongated. We'll talk about that in a minute. And also, one other adjustment we can make is the block face angle. So that's going to be the angle of the block relative to the horizontal. So the horizontal is going to be the ground. So if we take a look at the ground and we take a look at the sprint block, or the sprint block face, and what angle is that relative to the ground? So it's actually going to be the back angle there, kind of where the extra metal is. So what angle is that set at? So, all right, so a couple studies here to dive into to give us, is it possible to get rid of this or no? Yeah. Sweet, cool. All right, so a couple of different tables here to dive into. These are actually from hopefully I'm saying this name right, Slonsky et al. From a study in 2013. So a couple things to look at. Let's look at an elongated start first. So the first thing that I'll point out is that elongated starts had the greatest horizontal velocity center of mass. Actually, you know what? Let me scratch that. That wasn't horizontal. That's just velocity center of mass. Slightly different. So the elongated start had the greatest velocity center of mass at both the block clearing and the toe off first step. You can see that's 3.9 and 2.89. And that's both of those numbers are statistically significantly better than the bunch and the medium start for those 2 time points. But if we come over here, that doesn't really translate into the time at 5 meters and time at 10 meters. The elongated start actually was statistically slower at both 5 meters and 10 meters. So what's going on there? It's actually because the elongated start, because it widens that horizontal distance, is actually putting you further behind the starting line. So if we take a look at the XCM is the horizontal distance from the starting line of your center of mass. It's actually statistically significantly greater, much greater than the bunch start and the medium start. So it puts us at a further distance from the starting line, which actually makes us go a longer total distance from start to finish. So that's going to be negative. So elongated start is out. So now we're down to bunched and medium. Which one do we use? I have in the corner over here, a medium start is going to be what we ultimately decide. And that's going to be because of all the data on both charts, okay? There's no significant differences except the block clearing rate, okay? The velocity center of mass at block clearing is statistically significantly higher for a medium start compared to a bunch start. And if we go over here to the time to 5 meters and time to 10 meters, there's no significant difference. So ultimately, we're going to decide to use a medium start that's going to be 30 to 50 centimeters between the blocks, okay? So I mentioned block face angles as well. All right, block face angles, as you can see, I have a big star there. We're going to decide to use the 30-degree angle. That's because a study done by Gassard et al. In 1992, I know it's an old study, but I don't care. It's got the 30-degree block angle has a statistically significantly better horizontal start velocity compared to 50 and 70. It's actually 2.94. There's a standard deviation there as well. But the 70-degree is 2.37, so that's a big difference in horizontal start velocity. Remember, velocity is a change in speed over time. So then we also have acceleration. Acceleration's also much faster for the 30-degree angle compared to the 50 and 70. So kind of wrapping this up, we're going to use the 30-degree. And what the authors suggested for these results, why they were like they were, is because of the medial gastrocnemius EMG activity in the 30-degree block start. Okay, you can see the medial gastrocnemius EMG activity is much greater compared to every other block start angle. So that's what they proposed. Why? So that's what we're going to use. Okay, so now that we have ourselves set up, all right, we put ourselves in the best position possible as far as the machines that we're going to use, the block start, right? So now how do we capitalize off that? What do we have to do to ensure that we're being as optimal as possible with our start? So impulse is going to be the driving factor. As far as I can tell from reading the research, impulse is going to be the driving factor. So quickly, I know I gave a definition earlier of impulse. It was the area under the force time curve. That's fairly vague. So there's 3 parameters to impulse. Impulse is the duration of force application. There's 3 parameters. Duration of force application, the RFD. RFD is rate of force development, and then we have maximal force, okay? Maximal force production. So those are going to be the parameters that define impulse. But those are 3 very different parameters. So we have to decide what's going to be an optimal combination of these 3. If we have, duration of force application, the race, as I mentioned in the first slide, was the duration of the race is 10 seconds. All right, if we spend too much time producing force, at what point is that a negative quality compared to a positive quality? So we'll have to look at that. So here we can see the effect of impulse from a 100-meter sprint start. So this was a study done, again, by Slonsky et al., but this is from 2010. This is a different study, but a lot of great information coming out of this person, this researcher. So what they did here, they compared elite sprinters and well-trained sprinters. Elite sprinters, I believe, were somewhere in the range of 10.5 seconds and under with a standard deviation, a small standard deviation. And the well-trained sprinters, actually we'll come back to well-trained sprinters at the end, but well-trained sprinters were about 11.3 with a standard deviation that put them up to about 11.5. So about a second difference between the 2. But you can see the well-trained sprinters and elite sprinters have no difference in block time, or this PTRB here is pushing time on the rear block. So there's no difference between the two as far as time goes of duration on the block. So that's going to be our duration of force application. That's one parameter of impulse. Let's go down to the bottom here. We have rate of force development. Okay, rate of force development is almost double for elite sprinters compared to well-trained sprinters. So that is very important. It's 15,000 Newton seconds to almost 8.5 Newton seconds. So very big difference there. If we look at force impulse is also statistically significantly greater in elite sprinters compared to well-trained sprinters. So that's also a significant finding. And then last thing we do, what does this information help us determine, right? What, I just say what it is, but what is that useful for? So if we come over here and we look at velocity center of mass, right, VCN, we can see that because, we can infer that because of this rate of force development being so much greater in elite sprinters compared to well-trained sprinters, that could be the purpose driving the velocity center of mass being statistically greater for elite sprinters compared to well-trained sprinters. So we're going to use that as we go forth too. Next thing, so that was one study that did not find that block time was correlated to a decrease or an improved result in the 100 meter. This study shows similar findings, but also different findings. So the similar findings are the rate of force development. Over here, we can see that has a coefficient correlation of -51, so a reverse correlation here where when RFD, when rate of force development is high, okay, your 100 meter sprint time is low, so that's a positive. If we increase the rate of force development, we're going to have a lower or an improved 100 meter time. This study was slightly different in the fact that it had a block time that showed the less time you spend on the block, the less time it's going to take you to reach the end point, the 100 meters. Okay, so slightly different results, but we can take away that the rate of force development is the same for both studies. So kind of transitioning from the kinetics and kinematics of the sprint block start into the resistance training, because this is a study that we want to look at both sides of it. How can, are these factors actually driving an efficient sprint block start? And if they are, can we improve them even more by using certain resistance training techniques or protocols? So let's take a look at a few of these resistance training studies and see what we find. So a study in 2002 by Blazevich and Jenkins. Okay, I don't really like this study, but I think it has a few things that we can use. So 4-week period of training, and during that time period they measured the 20 meter acceleration and 20 meter flying sprints. So they had experienced male sprinters, resistance training twice a week, 2 groups, high velocity, low velocity. Okay, we're going to use those later, high velocity and low velocity. No significant differences between groups as far as their 20 meter acceleration and 20 meter flying time. They did, however, have as an overall subject total 12.4% increase in 1 rep max squat. Okay, and that translated into only a 1.9% improvement in max speed. So that's not a good ratio, I would assume. The reason I said I don't like the study for the most part is because of some of the things that they stated throughout the research. The subjects did not use the same equipment to train, spotter assistance on some lifts, Smith machine squats, and subjects chose their own weight that allowed them to be fatigued within the allotted number of reps. And they also didn't use starting blocks, so the data is slightly different, but we're going to take away that they use the high velocity and low velocity group, and they're kind of less than desirable results for the squat 1 rep max. The next study here, Wilson et al. From 1996. Briefly, this was an 8-week study to determine the significance of resistance training on 40 meter sprint performance, and they demonstrated that there was a statistical significant gain by doing their training protocol. So they had a 21% squat improvement in their 1 RM, which again didn't translate very well. Only a 2.2% improvement in time. Okay. So kind of summarizing some of these results. Oh, I'm sorry, we skipped the slide. We're back. All right, last resistance training study. So short-term effects of short-term performance of high power and high force or combined. This is my favorite study out of the ones I presented here today. So they have three groups. They have a force group, a power group, and a combination group. 9 weeks of training, squat 1RM increased 10% as a whole. Again, we see that. But the same thing we see again is no improvement or no change in 30-meter sprint performance. But the authors quickly, they did describe the combination group being superior to force because out of the variables tested, the combination group experienced statistical gains in more of the variables tested compared to the other two groups. So that's something we're going to take away too. All right. So kind of summarizing, and I'll summarize quickly here. We're going to use a medium block parameter for the reasons I discussed earlier. If you want to rewind and check that out, go ahead. 30-degree block face angle. Again, I already stated the reasons. You can rewind and check that. And increased rate of force development. Okay, increased rate of force development is potentially decreases block time and potentially increases our performance in the 100-meter block performance, and specifically the start. Okay, so those are factors that appear to improve 100-meter sprint performance. So, okay, last thing for summarizing, the training studies to this point have produced meager results. All right, we're looking for something better in our study, and the question remains why? Why did they produce such significant gains in the squat 1RM, but at the same time they produced a little transfer to sprint performance? So potentially it's not specific enough. Sprinting requires high force and high rate of force development. So those are two different things. And training must be movement and velocity specific. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. So the problem, like I just mentioned, some of these things, the studies aren't producing the results that we would hope, and specificity appears to be the reason why. One of the reasons I think that we haven't seen the results that we want is because the studies have used linear periodization, and that kind of limits what aspects of training you can work on at one time. So sprinting requires a high force, right? We're starting from not moving. So we have to produce a high force to get our bodies moving. Okay, these guys are athletes, muscular athletes who have a lot of body mass. They need to move quickly. You need to move that mass quickly. So that requires force. Okay, we need to produce a lot of force. That's 1RM strength. We also need to produce power. Okay, rate of force development, and those are things we can train. But we can train them at the same time using daily undulated periodization. So if we look at Ray et al. And Peterson et al., they clearly showed that daily undulated periodization is superior to linear periodization. So, and the reasons for that likely increases the efficiency of high threshold motor unit recruitment compared to linear periodization, and leads to more growth and greater rate of force development, which are both prerequisites to sprint performance. Study participants, okay? We're going to use written informed consents. I'd like to have at least 16 well-trained male sprinters who are currently training for competition. Well-trained is going to be defined, like I mentioned earlier, from the Slonsky et al. Study. It's going to be roughly 11.5 seconds to complete the 100-meter time, or 100-meter race, I'm sorry. The athletes that we choose are going to be resistance training for at least 2 years, major injury-free, and I'd like to have them between 18 and 29 years old. The protocol, okay, we have two different protocols. Protocol for sprinting and protocol for resistance training. So we'll do sprinting first, pre and post testing. You haven't do it on time? Good, okay. So we're gonna do, I'll do the bottom here first. So the warm-up protocol for the sprinting is gonna be a dynamic warm-up, all right? Walking lunges, walking toe touches, walking side squats, inchworms, and skips, okay? Dynamic movements. Research has clearly shown that dynamic is better than static, so that's a whole different topic. No longer than 15 yards, 2 practice sprints following that, 50 and 75% effort, and 5 to 7 minute rest periods between the post warm-up and the first sprint. Once we get into the actual sprints after the warm-up, we're going to have each of the participants perform 3 maximal effort 100-meter sprints. Again, 5 to 7 minute rest period between the sprints. And out of those 3 sprints, we're going to have just the best one count. So whichever one is the best time, we're going to take that into consideration and use that for our results. All right, so the protocol for the sprint kinetic measures. Remember, kinetic is producing force, okay? Motions that produce force. So we're going to look at these things. Actually, Slonsky et al., that same study, I keep referring to the same one, established critical phases of the sprint start. So we're going to use one of those phases, the pushing phase, and we're going to measure some of those variables. Duration of pushing time, block clearing, percentage of push time on the rear block, average speed and acceleration of center of mass during pushing phase, obviously the rate of force development, I keep talking about that, and the force impulse, okay? And to do this, we're going to build in force plates on the sprint blocks, okay? So, the kinetic measurements, right? Kinetic is description of motion, okay? So we're going to use one reflective marker on the skin at the xiphoid process. That's probably just a little bit higher than center of mass, but for my purposes, that's going to be fine. And we're going to measure the time to get to 5 meters, the time to 10 meters, time to 50 meters, and the time to 100 meters. Specifically, this is a study geared towards the sprint block starts, so mostly, you know, under 10 meters and under. But if they're already running, why not test those other parameters as well? We're going to use a 2-dimensional video system, Dartfish, used for this analysis. So the protocol for resistance training. Resistance training is going to be 6 weeks long. Intro week 1, taper and test week 6. The taper and test, the testing will include 1 rep max testing and also our sprint testing. Okay, the 2 groups, we're going to have 2 groups of daily undulated periodization. We have strength and power groups. Strength will be defined as SPS, where it's a strength, power, strength day. They'll be training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, resistance training. So SPS, strength, power, strength. The power group is going to be power, strength, power. And I have the parameters listed as far as intensities go for those days. The strength days are going to be greater than 85% 1 rep max, and the power days are going to be roughly 50 to 60% 1 rep max. Volume, weekly training volume will be equated for each group. We'll do our main movements of the study are going to be a barbell squat and a trap bar deadlift. I like the trap bar deadlift because I think it can be movement specific with a triple extension. Out of the blocks, we see triple extension if we do a trap bar deadlift rather than an Olympic lift, such as a clean or a jerk. We can still achieve that triple extension with a lot less technique. So assistance movements are going to be bench press, overhead press, bent over rows, and of course, because we saw the EMG activity from Gassard et al., we're going to use some standing calf raises as well. Okay. Finally, the resistance training. Actually, you know what? This is not resistance training. This is actually going to be sprint training. So sprint training, we don't want to stop sprinting. That's the movement we're testing. So we're going to continue sprinting, but it's actually not going to be controlled for. So I'm going to treat this like a nutrition dietary recall, where it's not controlled, but we do recalls on performance of the practices that are going to occur on Tuesday and Thursday. And Saturday and Sunday are going to be no training of any kind, no physical activity. The Tuesday, Thursday sprint sessions are going to be conducted and monitored by qualified sprint coaches that we hope to determine who they are before we even have subjects. So, good coaches. All right, instrumentation and statistical techniques, criterion-based validity measures and independent t-tests will help us determine valid measurements of our variables. We're going to use SPSS to test our kinetic variables. Okay, actually, between kinematic and kinetic variables. And we're going to use Pearson's correlation, obviously, the R value. We're going to have 1-factor ANOVA for in-between groups, post-hoc tests, and our significance level is going to be at 5%. Okay, here's my references, and thank you very much.